Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked back to his small house in the Nevada desert. The storm had been worse than the weather report said it would be. Lightning had struck somewhere close to his property and he needed to check if his solar panels were still working. Without them, he would have no power for days. The desert air was cool now, after the rain. Jake liked living out here, far from the busy cities. He had bought this land cheap 5 years ago after leaving the army. His nearest neighbor was 20 miles away, which was exactly how he liked it. He fixed cars and tractors for the local ranchers, and that gave him enough money to live quietly as he walked toward the solar panel array behind his house. Jake saw something that made him stop. There was a strange glow coming from behind the big rocks, where he usually found lizards sunning themselves. The light was not like anything he had seen before. It seemed to change colors, going from blue to green to purple. Jake grabbed a flashlight from his tool shed and walked carefully toward the glow. His boots crunched on the wet sand as he moved between the rocks. What he found there made him forget how to breathe for a moment. A small aircraft sat wedged between 2 large boulders. But this was not like any aircraft Jake had ever seen. It was about the size of his pickup truck, but it was perfectly smooth all over. The metal seemed to shift and change color in the beam of his flashlight. There were no sharp edges anywhere on it, and no visible windows or doors. Steam was rising from several places on the strange craft. Some kind of liquid was leaking from underneath it, making a soft hissing sound as it hit the wet sand. Jake could see that whatever this thing was, it was badly damaged. He walked around it slowly, trying to figure out what he was looking at. This was definitely not from any military he knew about. The shape was all wrong, and the material looked like nothing he had seen in his 12 years as an army mechanic. Then he heard something that made his heart race. It was a sound like someone trying to breathe but not getting enough air. Sound was coming from inside the craft. Jake looked for a way to get inside. He ran his hands over the smooth surface until he found a section that felt different. When he pressed on it, part of the wall suddenly became clear like glass. Inside, he could see a small figure lying on what looked like a chair or bed. The figure was definitely not human. It was about the size of a 10-year-old child, but its arms and legs were too long and thin. Its skin looked almost see-through, and Jake could see dark veins running underneath it. The creature had large eyes that took up most of its face, and they were a deep purple color. The creature was struggling to breathe. Some kind of mask was over its mouth and nose, but it was cracked and sparking. Jake could see that several machines inside the craft were broken or not working. Lights that should have been steady were blinking on and off. Jake knew he should probably run away.
Oh.
This was clearly something the government would want to know about. But the creature looked so helpless, and it was obviously dying. Never been able to walk away from anything that needed fixing, whether it was an old car or an injured animal. He pressed on the clear section again, and it opened like a door. The inside of the craft was filled with a sweet smell, like flowers, but not quite right. Jake climbed inside carefully. The creature turned its big purple eyes toward him. It tried to say something, but only a weak whistling sound came out. Then it pointed at the broken breathing mask and made a gesture that Jake understood perfectly. It needed help. Jake looked at the broken machines around the small space. None of them looked familiar, but he could see the basic problem. The power was not flowing correctly. Wires had come loose, and some components had burned out. The breathing system was not getting enough energy to work properly. He climbed back out of the craft and ran to his garage. He grabbed his toolbox, some spare wire, electrical tape, and a small battery from an old motorcycle. Gosh. If this was just a power and connection problem, maybe he could fix it. Back inside the strange craft, Jake worked as carefully as he could. The creature watched him with those large eyes, but it seemed to understand that Jake was trying to help. Jake traced the power lines from what looked like the main energy source to the breathing machine. Several connections had been broken in. The crash. He used his wire strippers to clean the ends of the alien wires. They were made of some kind of metal he did not recognize, but they conducted electricity, just like copper wire. He twisted them together with his spare wire and wrapped everything with electrical tape. The breathing machine made a soft humming sound and started working again. The creature took a deep breath through its mask, and its skin seemed to become less pale. But there were still other problems. Jake could see that the main power system was damaged. The craft had some kind of energy source that was unlike anything he knew, but the connections to it were burned out. Jake rigged up his motorcycle battery as a backup power source, running wires from it to what looked like the most important systems. It took him almost 6 hours to get everything working well enough. His back ached from hunching over in the small space, and his hands were cut from working with the strange metal. But slowly, the lights inside the craft became steady, and more machines started humming with power. The creature was sitting up, now breathing easily. It touched a section of the wall, and suddenly Jake could hear its voice, speaking in words he could understand. "Thank you," the voice said. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with a person talking. "I am called Zeph. Was lost in the storm between stars. My ship was damaged, and I thought I would die here." Jake sat back on his heels, still not quite believing what was happening. "I'm Jake. I fix things. That's what I do." Zeph made a sound that might have been laughter. "Yes, I can see that you fix things very well. You've saved my life with your fixing. Where are you from?" Jake asked. Zeph touched the wall again, and pictures appeared on it like a television screen. Jake saw images of stars and planets and ships flying between them. "I am a scout," Zeph explained. "My people explore new areas of space. We look for new worlds and new forms of life. I was separated from my ship during a great storm of energy. Are there more of you out there?" "Oh yes, many more. And many other kinds of beings as well. The space between stars is full of life." Jake, who fixes things. They talked for another hour as Jake finished his repairs and Zeph recovered his strength. Jake learned that there were thousands of different species living among the stars, that most of them were peaceful explorers like Zeph. When the craft was working well enough to fly again, Zeph prepared to leave. "I must find my ship and my people," he said, "but I will not forget your kindness." Zeph handed Jake a small object that looked like a crystal but felt warm to the touch. "This is a token of friendship from my people," Zeph explained. "It will remember this night in your good heart." Jake helped Zeph close up the craft and watched as it rose silently into the air. The strange ship hovered for a moment, and Jake could see Zeph inside, waving at him. Then it shot up into the dark sky and disappeared among the stars. Jake walked back to his house as the sun was starting to rise. He looked at the crystal in his hand. It was beautiful, but he assumed it was just a pretty rock from another world. He put it on his kitchen table and fell into bed, exhausted. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake smiled to himself. Wait until he tried to tell someone about this. Nobody would ever believe him. Jake woke up to a sound he had never heard before. It was deep and powerful, like the rumble of thunder, but it never stopped. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, making the windows of his small house shake and rattle. He rolled out of bed and looked at his alarm clock. It was 6 a.m, just 3 hours after he had finally fallen asleep. The crystal that Zeph had given him was still sitting on his kitchen table, catching the early morning light. Jake stumbled to his bedroom window and pulled back the curtain. What he saw made him fully awake in an instant. 3 large black ships, hung in the air around his property, were nothing like Zeph's small craft. These ships were huge, each one the size of a city bus, and they floated silently about 50 feet off the ground. Their surfaces were so black they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ships had no visible windows or doors, but Jake could see weapon-like projections pointing down at his house. Red lights blinked along their sides in patterns that hurt his eyes to look at. The rumbling sound was coming from these ships, a low vibration that made his teeth ache. Jake grabbed his jeans and pulled them on quickly. His hands were shaking as he tried to button his shirt. Whatever these things were, they were definitely not friendly like Zeph had been. He ran to his kitchen and looked out the back window. More shapes were moving in the desert behind his house. Dark figures were walking toward his home, and they were definitely not human. Even from a distance, Jake could see they were too tall and moved in a way that looked wrong. The front door of his house suddenly exploded inward. Jake jumped back as pieces of wood flew across his living room. 6 tall figures in dark uniforms stepped through the broken doorway. These beings looked somewhat like humans, but everything about them was stretched and wrong. They were at least 7 feet tall, with arms and legs that seemed too long for their bodies. Their faces were hidden behind smooth black masks that reflected Jake's terrified expression back at him. The figures carried weapons that looked like rifles, but they glowed with the same red light as the ships outside. They moved with perfect coordination, spreading out through Jake's small house like they had practiced this many times before. One of the figures stepped forward, was taller than the others, and had silver markings on its uniform. When it spoke, the words came from a small device attached to its chest. The voice sounded flat and mechanical. "Human designated Jake Martinez," the device said. "You will remain still and comply with all instructions." Jake's mouth felt dry as sand. "Who are you? What do you want?" The tall figure tilted its head in a way that reminded Jake of a bird studying an insect. "I am Captain Vex of the Hegemony Fleet. You have been identified as having contact with a fugitive from justice." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake said, but even as he spoke, he knew this was about ZEPH. Captain Vex gestured to one of the other figures, who began searching through Jake's house. They moved things around roughly, not caring when they broke his furniture or knocked over his pictures. "The fugitive you assisted is a criminal who stole valuable information from the Hegemony," Captain Vex continued. "This theft threatens the security of multiple star systems. You will provide us with the location of this criminal and any materials he gave to you." Jake thought about Zeph, remembering the small being's grateful purple eyes and gentle voice. He wasn't a criminal. He was hurt and lost. "I just helped fix his ship." Captain Vex made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was cold and unpleasant. "Your primitive understanding of the situation is irrelevant. The being you call Zeph is a dangerous insurgent who has caused significant damage to Hegemony operations." One of the searching figures made a clicking sound and held up the crystal that Zeph had given Jake. It was still sitting on his kitchen table where he had left it. Captain Vex moved quickly to examine the crystal, pulled out a damned ass, a device that looked like a scanner, and pointed it at the small object. The device made several beeping sounds, and then began to make a high-pitched alarm noise. All of the figures in the room suddenly became very still. Captain Vex turned his masked face toward Jake, and even though Jake could not see his eyes, he could feel the alien's anger. "This is worse than we thought," Captain Vex said. "This crystal contains not just stolen research data, but something far more dangerous." Jake felt his heart pounding. "It's just a gift." He said it was a token of friendship. Captain Vex held up the crystal, and it began to glow softly in his hand. "This device contains the coordinates to your planet's location within our galactic database. It also contains access codes to communication networks that span multiple star systems." Jake did not understand most of what Captain Vex was saying, but he could tell it was bad news. "Your friend has given you something that could expose your entire species to threats you cannot imagine," Captain Vex continued. "There are beings in this galaxy who would destroy your world simply for the resources it contains. Others would enslave your people for labor. The Hegemony maintains order by keeping primitive worlds like yours hidden and protected." "Protected," Jake said. "You broke into my house and threatened me with weapons. That doesn't feel like protection." Captain Vex tilted his head again. "Protection sometimes requires harsh measures. Your species is not ready for contact with galactic civilization. You lack the technology and wisdom to survive among the stars." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. These beings had destroyed his door, searched his house, and were talking about his entire species like they were children who could not take care of themselves. "Maybe you should let us decide that for ourselves," Jake said. "That decision has already been made," Captain Vex replied. "The Hegemony Council determined long ago that your species should remain isolated until you reach a more advanced state of development. That process typically takes several thousand of your years." Captain Vex gestured to his soldiers, and they raised their weapons to point at Jake. "Unfortunately, your contact with the fugitive and possession of this device has compromised that protection. The standard procedure is to eliminate the security breach and confiscate all dangerous materials. Jake realized that Captain Vex was talking about killing him. "Wait," he said. "I didn't ask for any of this. I was just trying to help someone." "Who was hurt?" "Your motivations are irrelevant," Captain Vex said. "You now possess information that could lead to the destruction of your entire world. The hegemony cannot allow this risk to continue." The weapons in the hands of the soldiers began to glow brighter. Jake could feel heat coming from them, even from several feet away, just as Captain Vex was about to give the order to fire. The crystal in his hand began to pulse with bright light. The light got brighter and brighter until everyone in the room had to look away. When the light faded, Jake heard a familiar sound. It was the soft humming of Zeph's ship. Outside, Jake could see the small craft materializing out of thin air as if it had been invisible until now. But Zeph was not alone this time. Other ships were appearing around Jake's property, ships of different sizes and shapes. Some looked like metal flowers, others like geometric crystals. All of them were pointing weapons at the 3 black hegemony cruisers. Captain Vex made an angry clicking sound. Impossible. How did they find us so quickly? The crystal was now glowing so brightly that it was hard to look at directly. Jake could hear a voice coming from it, speaking in that wind chime language he remembered from the night before. "Jake, who fixes things," Zeph's voice said through the crystal. "I am sorry that my gift has brought danger to you, but perhaps it is time for your people to learn the truth about the galaxy around them." Captain Vex spun around to face Jake. "What have you done?" Jake looked at the crystal, then at the alien ships outside, then back at Captain Vex. For the first time since, these beings had broken into his house. Jake smiled. "I think," he said, "I just fixed something else that was broken." The crystal in Captain Vex's hand was now so bright that it filled Jake's entire house with white light. Through his broken front door, Jake could see more alien ships appearing out of nowhere. They surrounded the 3 black hegemony cruisers, like wolves circling their prey. Captain Vex dropped the crystal and stepped back from it. Even through his mask, Jake could tell the alien was afraid. "Retreat to the ships," he ordered his soldiers. "Prepare for immediate departure." But before any of them could move, Zeph's small craft landed softly in Jake's front yard. The door opened, and the small alien stepped out. He looked exactly the same as he had the night before, but now he carried himself differently. He walked, with confidence, like someone who was in control of the situation. "Captain Vex," Zeph said in perfect English. His voice was no longer the gentle wind chime sound Jake remembered. Now it was strong and clear. "You are a long way from hegemony space." Captain Vex turned his weapon toward Zeph. Fugitive designation Zeph 471. "You will surrender immediately and return the stolen data." Zeph made that sound like laughter again. But this time it was warm instead of cold. "Oh, Vex, you still don't understand what's really happening here, do you?" Jake looked back and forth between the 2 aliens. There was clearly more to this story than either of them had told him. "I am not a fugitive, Captain," Zeph continued. "I am Agent Zeph of the Galactic Liberation Front. The data I took from your computers was not stolen. It was evidence of your crimes." Captain Vex raised his weapon higher. "Impossible. The Liberation Front was destroyed years ago." "You believed what you wanted to believe," Zeph said. "We have been growing stronger while you convinced yourselves we were gone. We have allies on dozens of worlds now, including some within your own hegemony." Jake felt confused and angry. "Wait a minute," he said. "You lied to me. You said you were just a scout who got lost." Zeph turned toward Jake, and his large purple eyes looked sad. "I am sorry, Jake, who fixes things. I could not tell you the truth while my mission was still secret, but I was lost, and you did save my life. That part was completely true." "What mission?" Jake asked. Zeph gestured toward the crystal, which was still glowing on Jake's floor. "I was sent to gather evidence about the hegemony's expansion plans. They have been secretly mapping primitive worlds like yours, planning to invade them when the time is right." Captain Vex made an angry clicking sound. "The hegemony brings order to chaos. protect weak species from the dangers of the galaxy by enslaving them, Zeph said. By taking their resources and forcing them to serve your empire. Jake looked at Captain Vex. Is that true? Captain Vex tilted his head in that bird-like way. Your species is primitive and violent. Left alone, you would eventually destroy yourselves or become a threat to civilized worlds. The hegemony provides structure and purpose. The hegemony provides slavery, Zeph said firmly. I have seen what they do to worlds like yours. Jake, they wait until a species develops space travel, then they arrive with overwhelming force. They offer protection in exchange for submission. Those who refuse are destroyed. Jake felt sick to his stomach. And Earth is on their list. Your world has been under surveillance for over 50 years, Zeph said. The hegemony has been waiting for you to develop faster than light travel. Once you do, they will reveal themselves and demand your surrender. Captain Vex laughed that cold laugh again. And now, thanks to your interference, we don't have to. Wait, this human has been exposed to galactic technology. The contamination protocol requires immediate action. Jake didn't like the sound of that. What's the contamination protocol? Elimination of all witnesses and sterilization of the contact site, Captain Vex said casually, as if he was talking about cleaning his house. Zeph stepped closer to Jake. That's why the crystal was so important, Jake. It wasn't just a gift. It was a beacon. If the hegemony ever found Earth and tried to implement their contamination protocol, the crystal would send a distress signal to all Liberation Front ships in this sector of the galaxy. Jake looked down at the glowing crystal. So when Captain Vex scanned it, he activated it, Zeph finished. Every free world within 100 light years now knows that Earth is in danger. Outside, Jake could see more ships arriving. They came in all shapes and sizes, some beautiful and elegant, others looking like they were built for war. Them were pointing weapons at the hegemony cruisers. Captain Vex was talking rapidly into a communication device on his wrist. Jake couldn't understand the language, but the tone was urgent and angry. You're calling for backup, Zeph said. Wasn't a question. The hegemony fleet will arrive within 1 of your hours, Captain Vex said. Enough ships to turn this entire planet's surface into glass. Your little rebellion ends here. Zeph looked at Jake with those large purple eyes. That's why I need to ask you something very important. Jake, who fixes things. Something that will change your entire world. Jake felt like his head was spinning. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from being a simple mechanic to being in the middle of some kind of galactic war. What do you need to ask me? Liberation Front can protect Earth, Zeph said. We have the ships and the technology to fight off the hegemony fleet. But we cannot act without permission from your species. Permission? We don't conquer worlds, Jake. We liberate them. Only if they want to be liberated. Someone from your species has to officially request our help and agree to join the Liberation Front as an ally. Jake stared at Zeph. You want me to speak for all of humanity? We're the first human to make contact with galactic civilization, Zeph said. You showed kindness to a stranger without asking for anything in return. You risked your own safety. To help someone in need, that makes you exactly the kind of person we hope to find when we discover new worlds. Captain Vex made that clicking sound again. One primitive human cannot speak for an entire species. This is meaningless. According to galactic law, first contact gives the contacted individual the right to speak for their species in emergency situations, Zeph said. Jake Martinez is now legally Earth's first ambassador to the galaxy. Jake felt like he was going to throw up. I can't make a decision like that. I'm just a mechanic. I fix engines and tractors. You fix my ship, Zeph said gently. You fixed the most advanced piece of technology you had ever seen, using nothing but spare parts and your own intelligence. You didn't hesitate to help when you saw someone in need. Outside, Jake could see energy weapons starting to glow on both the Liberation Front ships and the hegemony cruisers. The standoff was about to become a battle. But if I say yes, Jake, said, what happens to Earth? Your world joins the community of free worlds, Zeph said. You receive technology and protection. But you also accept responsibility to help other species who need liberation from oppression. And if I say no, Captain Vex answered that question. If you refuse Liberation Front assistance, the Hegemony fleet will implement the contamination protocol. Your species will be extinct within the day. Jake looked at the crystal glowing on his floor, then at the alien ships outside his broken door, then at Zeph's hopeful purple eyes. Some choice, he said. But even as he said it, Jake realized that it really wasn't a choice at all. The Hegemony had already decided to destroy humanity. The Liberation Front was offering a chance to fight back. I accept, Jake said. Earth accepts the protection of the Liberation Front. The moment he spoke those words, every Liberation Front ship outside began to glow with power. Captain Vex raised his weapon toward Jake, but before he could fire, a beam of blue light from Zeph's ship struck him and his soldiers. He collapsed to the floor, unconscious but still breathing. Welcome to the galaxy, Ambassador Martinez, Zeph said with a smile. Jake stared at the unconscious Hegemony soldiers scattered across his living room floor. Captain Vex was breathing but completely still, his weapon lying useless beside him. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in. I just spoke for the entire human race, Jake said quietly. 7 billion people, and I made the decision for all of them. Zeph walked over and picked up the glowing crystal from Jake's floor. In emergency situations, first contact law is very clear. The contacted individual becomes the temporary representative for their species. You had the legal right to make that choice. Legal right doesn't make it feel right, Jake said. He walked to his broken front door and looked out at the alien ships surrounding his property. What happens now? Now we prepare for war, Zeph said. My ships can hold off the first Hegemony attack, but they will keep sending more forces until they win or give up. And the Hegemony never gives up. Jake felt a cold fear in his stomach. How many ships are they sending? Zeph touched a device on his wrist, and a hologram appeared in the air between them, showed a map of space with thousands of tiny lights moving toward one central point. Our scouts report at least 500 Hegemony vessels heading toward Earth. They will arrive in approximately 6 hours. Jake looked at the Liberation Front ships outside. He could count maybe 30 of them. We're outnumbered. In ships, yes, Zeph said, but we have advantages they don't expect. And we have something else that might change everything. Humanity, Zeph said simply. Your species has qualities that most galactic civilizations have forgotten. You adapt quickly to new situations. You solve problems with limited resources. And you fight harder when you're protecting something you love. Jake thought about his sister Lisa, who taught 3rd grade in Denver. She always said that kids could learn anything if you explained it the right way. He thought about his nephew, Bobby, who is probably getting ready for school right now, worried about his math test instead of alien invasions. They don't even know this is happening, Jake said. Everyone I care about is going to work and school like it's a normal day. That's going to change very soon, Zeph said. Once the fighting starts, your governments will detect our ships. Your military will respond. The secret will be out. Jake ran his hands through his hair. This is insane. Yesterday I was fixing trucks. Today I'm in the middle of a space war. Jake Zeph said gently, I need you to understand something important. This was always going to happen. The Hegemony was always planning to take your world. The only thing that has changed is that now you have allies willing to help you fight back. A new voice spoke from behind them. Is that really true? Jake spun around to see a tall woman in a Liberation Front uniform standing in his doorway. She had dark blue skin and silver hair, but her face was almost human. She moved with the confident grace of a soldier. Commander Kira, Zeph said. I thought you were coordinating the fleet positions. I wanted to meet Earth's new ambassador, Kira said. She walked over to Jake and looked him up and down. You're smaller than I expected. Sorry to disappoint you, Jake said. Kira laughed. I'm not disappointed. Some of the best fighters I've known have been small. Size doesn't matter in space combat. She turned to Zeph. Go. We have a problem. Our long-range sensors are picking up more Hegemony ships than we first detected. It's not 500 vessels. It's closer to 1,000. Jake felt his heart sink. 1,000 ships? Hegemony is taking Earth very seriously, Kira said. They're sending enough force to destroy every major city on your planet in less than an hour. Can we stop them? Jake asked. Kira and Zeph exchanged a look. Honestly, Kira said, probably not. We can hurt them badly, but they have too many ships. Jake sat down hard in his kitchen chair. So I just signed humanity's death warrant. No, Zeph said firmly. God. You gave your species a chance to fight. Without the Liberation Front, the hegemony would have simply arrived and demanded surrender. Any resistance would have been crushed immediately. At least this way, we'd go down fighting, Jake said bitterly. Actually, Kira said, there might be another option. But it's dangerous, and it would require Jake to do something very difficult. Jake looked up at her. What kind of something? Kira touched her own wrist device, and another hologram appeared. This one showed Earth surrounded by a complex network of energy lines. The Liberation Front has been working on a new type of planetary defense system. It's called a Unity Shield. What does it do? Jake asked. It links the defensive capabilities of every ship in the system, Zeph explained. Instead of 30 ships fighting independently, we become one large defense network. The combined power is much greater than the sum of its parts. That sounds good, Jake said. What's the problem? Kira pointed to a central node in the hologram. The system requires a coordinator, someone to link all the different ship computers together. It has to be someone from the planet being defended, and they have to voluntarily accept the responsibility. You want me to be some kind of space traffic controller? Jake asked. More than that, Zeph said. It would become the central processing unit for the entire defense network. Every ship, every weapon, every shield would be connected through your mind. Jake stared at them. Through my mind? The technology exists, Kira said. We can create a neural link that would let you coordinate the entire battle in real time. But the mental strain would be enormous. How enormous? Jake asked. Kira hesitated. Most species can't handle the information flow. Their minds shut down after a few minutes. Hey, we've only tried it 3 times before. What happened those 3 times?
Yes.
Once it worked perfectly, Zeph said. The defender was able to coordinate. A victory against overwhelming odds. The other 2 times, the mental stress killed the coordinator within minutes. Jake felt sick again, so I have a 1 in 3 chance of surviving. Those aren't good odds, Kira admitted. But without the Unity Shield, humanity has no chance at all. Jake stood up and walked to his kitchen window. He could see the desert stretching out toward the mountains, peaceful and quiet under the morning sun. Somewhere out there, his sister was probably making breakfast for Bobby before driving him to school. They had no idea that their world was about to change forever. If I do this, Jake said, and if I survive, what happens next? If we can defeat this hegemony fleet, Zeph said, word will spread throughout the galaxy. Other oppressed worlds will see that the hegemony can be beaten. The Liberation Front will grow stronger, and Earth becomes a full member of the galactic community, Kira said. Your people will have access to technologies that will solve most of your current problems. Hunger, disease, energy shortages, all of these things can be eliminated with what we know. Jake thought about Bobby struggling with his math homework, how excited the kid would be to learn about real spaceships and alien civilizations. He thought about Lisa, who would probably want to start an intergalactic exchange student program. But if I don't survive the neural link, Jake said, Earth falls anyway. Yes, Zeph said honestly. That's the choice you have to make. Jake looked at his reflection in the kitchen window. Just yesterday, he had been nobody special. Just a guy who fixed broken things in the desert.
Oh.
The fate of his entire species rested on his shoulders. But maybe that was exactly right. His whole life, Jake had been the person who stepped up when something needed fixing. He had never walked away from a problem, no matter how difficult or dangerous it seemed. Okay, Jake said, turning back to face the 2 aliens. Let's do it. Kira nodded approvingly. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Jake said, but it's not really a choice, is it? I can't let my people die without trying everything possible to save them. Zeph placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. He said, is exactly why we believe humanity deserves to be free. The Neuralink device looked like a simple headband made of silver metal. Kira held it carefully as she explained how it would work. Once we put this on you, your mind will be connected to every ship in our fleet. You'll be able to see through their sensors, control their weapons, and coordinate their movements. Jake sat in the command chair that Zeph's people had quickly installed in his living room. Through his broken front door, he could see the Liberation Front ships taking defensive positions around Earth. In the distance, he could make out the first signs of the approaching hegemony fleet, tiny dots of light growing larger against the black sky. How will I know what to do? Jake asked. I've never been in a space battle before. The ship computers will help guide you, Zeph said. They contain thousands of years of tactical knowledge. Your job is to coordinate and make the final decisions. Commander? Kira checked her instruments. The hegemony fleet will be in weapons range in 15 minutes. Need to activate the Unity Shield now. Jake thought one more time about his sister Lisa and his nephew Bobby. By now, news reports were probably starting to appear about strange objects in the sky. The world was about to learn that they were not alone in the universe, and that they were under attack. I'm ready, Jake, said Kira, placed the Neuralink device on Jake's head. Immediately, the world around him changed. Suddenly, Jake could see everything. He was looking through the sensors of 30 different ships at once, watching the hegemony fleet approach from multiple angles. The enemy ships were massive, each one the size of a city block. And they moved in perfect formation like a school of deadly fish. Information flowed through Jake's mind faster than he had ever experienced. Ship positions, weapon capabilities, shield strengths, energy levels, all of it became as clear to him as the tools in his garage had always been. I can see them, Jake said, his voice sounding strange even to himself. So many ships. Through the Neuralink, he could feel the minds of the alien crews throughout the Liberation Front fleet. They were afraid, but determined, ready to fight and die for the freedom of a world they had never seen before. The hegemony fleet reached weapons range and immediately opened fire. Beams of red energy lanced out toward Earth, but Jake was ready. For them, without conscious thought, he coordinated the Liberation Front ships to form a protective barrier. Their combined shields absorbed the first attack, though Jake could feel the strain on the energy systems. First wave blocked, Kira announced, but they're just testing our defenses. Jake could see the hegemony ships regrouping for a more serious attack. There were so many of them spread across space like a dark cloud. He began moving the Liberation Front ships into better positions, using their smaller size and greater speed to create overlapping fields of fire. The second attack came from 3 directions at once. Jake split his attention between multiple battle zones, directing some ships to intercept incoming missiles, while others targeted the enemy's weapon systems. It was like playing an incredibly complex video game, except the stakes were the survival of his entire species. Through the neural link, Jake could feel the strain building in his mind. The information flow was enormous, and keeping track of everything was becoming harder with each passing minute. He began to understand why most people couldn't handle this responsibility. But Jake had spent his entire life working with complex systems, understanding how all the parts fitted together. A car engine had hundreds of moving pieces, and a good mechanic had to keep track of all of them at once. This was just a bigger, more complicated engine. Zeph's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your vital signs are becoming unstable? The neural load is too high? I'm okay, Jake said, though he could taste blood in his mouth. Just need to find the right balance. The hegemony fleet was getting frustrated with the Liberation Front's defensive tactics. They began concentrating their fire on individual ships, trying to overwhelm their shields through sheer firepower. Jake responded by constantly rotating his ships, never letting any one vessel take too much damage. But there were limits to what 30 ships could do against 1,000. Slowly, inevitably, the Liberation Front began to lose ground. One ship's shields failed completely, and Jake had to pull it back before it was destroyed. Then another ship took critical damage to its weapon systems. We're losing, Kira said. The math is against us. Jake felt something shift in his mind. The neural link was bringing him more than just tactical information. He was starting to understand the deeper patterns of the battle, seeing connections that the ship computers couldn't calculate. No, Jake said. We're not losing. We're learning. He'd been thinking about this wrong. The hegemony fleet was powerful, but it was also predictable. They fought like they always fought, using overwhelming force and straightforward attacks. But Jake wasn't a military commander trained in traditional tactics. He was a mechanic who solved problems by thinking outside the box. Jake began moving his ships in patterns. That made no sense according to normal space combat doctrine. Instead of forming defensive lines, he spread them out, seemingly at random. Instead of concentrating firepower, he had them take quick shots and then retreat. What are you doing? Kira asked. You're breaking every rule of fleet engagement. Not fighting a fleet engagement, Jake said. I'm fixing a broken system. The hegemony commanders were confused by the Liberation Front's new tactics. They kept expecting Jake to form up for a proper battle, but instead his ships darted around, like insects, stinging and then disappearing. But Jake wasn't just being random. He was slowly maneuvering the hegemony ships into a specific configuration, like pieces on a three-dimensional chessboard. The enemy commanders didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Now Jake said, "Dot all 30 Liberation Front." Ships fired at once, their weapons targeted at very specific points in the hegemony formation. The concentrated firepower struck the enemy fleet's command ship, just as it was passing through the center of its own formation. The massive vessel exploded in a ball of white fire. The explosion was so large that it damaged dozens of nearby hegemony ships, and the electromagnetic pulse knocked out communication systems throughout their fleet. Without coordination from their command ship, the hegemony fleet fell into chaos. Individual captains began making their own decisions. Some retreating, others attacking, many just trying to avoid colliding with each other. Jake pressed his advantage, sent his ships darting through the confused enemy formation, targeting their communication arrays and weapon systems. It was like disabling a car by cutting specific wires. Find the right connections, and the whole system stops working. Within an hour, the mighty hegemony fleet was in full retreat. Nearly 200 of their ships had been destroyed or disabled, and the rest were fleeing toward the edge of the solar system as fast as they could travel. Jake felt the neural link disconnect as Kira removed the device from his head. He collapsed back in his chair, exhausted but alive. Possible, Kira whispered. You defeated a force 30 times larger than ours. I didn't defeat them, Jake said weakly. I just broke their system. Through his front door, Jake could see news helicopters approaching in the distance. Soon his house would be surrounded by reporters and government officials and curious people who wanted to know what had happened here. What happens now? Jake asked. Seb smiled. Now Earth joins the galactic community as a free world. Your victory here will inspire others to stand up against the hegemony. Galaxy will never be the same. Jake looked at the crystal, which was still glowing softly on his kitchen table. And I'm supposed to be some kind of ambassador? Only if you want to be, Zeph said. You've already done more than anyone could ask. Jake stood up slowly and walked to his kitchen window. The desert looked the same as always, but everything had changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and they had proven they could hold their own among the stars. I think, Jake said, I'm going to need a bigger toolbox.